I spent 14 years a heroin addict, and I've been 43 years in recovery. And part of the problem was just the availability. It was too easy to get this drug for me. The vape shops and the smoke shops where this stuff is being sold, and they're around military reservations in our country, and there's, the DA has done measurements of urine in our troops, and they're skyrocketing. The more it's directly correlated to the number of vape shops in their area. They're putting them around schools, they're putting them in our poorest neighborhoods, and now they're putting them in every gas station. And they're marketed for children, they're gummy bears, they're bright colors, they're candy flavored. I'm Markwayne. Thank you to Jim O'Neill, to Tom Brzoznik, to Marty Makary, and to Wendy as well. Thank you for that, for sharing your story. I spent 14 years a heroin addict, and I've been 43 years in recovery. And so I spent a lot of time talking about addiction and reading about it. And typically in most societies, you have about 10% of the population that suffers from addiction. But when there is availability, that can become a crisis. And you can have, for example, in Yemen, virtually 100% of the adult population is addicted to khat, because it's available on every corner. And my addiction started because of let me say this, it was precipitated by availability. In April of 1968, 3 months before my dad died, the French Connection, the biggest heroin bust in history, heroin recovery, happened all together. They got out of one automobile 200 pounds of heroin, of pure heroin, and they ended up getting, I think, about 1,600 pounds over time. That heroin was then stolen from the evidence locker room in the Manhattan DA's office, and it was distributed on the streets of New York. And for several years, there was $2 heroin, so it was available in deuces. And there were people on every corner in Harlem, every corner in the Lower East Side, who were selling $2 heroin. And 72nd Street in Central Park, there were over 100 dealers selling it at that time. And I had iron willpower in other parts of my life. I gave up candy for Lent when I was 13. I never ate candy again until I was in college. I gave up desserts for Lent the following year, and I never had another dessert till I was playing sports in college and trying to bulk up for sports. I felt I could do anything with my willpower, but this compulsion was absolutely impervious to my will. And part of the problem was just the availability. It was too easy to get this drug for me. And if you look at the waves of addiction that Marty talked about throughout history, they're all precipitated by availability. Morphine was invented in 1803, and during the 1880s and 1890s, there was an addiction crisis in this country. One, because of the availability of opium that was coming in through immigrant supply trains, and the other was there was a lot of Civil War veterans who had become addicted, and it was widely available. Cocaine was available in medicinal drinks and in popular drinks like Coca-Cola. And Congress, in response to that crisis, made heroin and cocaine illegal in 1914. And we had a break from it for many, many years. And then the drug culture began in the 1960s, where it was psychedelics, et cetera. But the real addiction crisis began after 1969, when that heroin became available. And you got a whole generation that was hooked on that. And then in 1970, Congress again acted to criminalize heroin possession. And we got a little bit of freedom until the 1980s, when there was the drug cartels in Mexico and elsewhere developed supply lanes through the Bahamas and Mexico that the DEA was not ready for at that time. There were huge surpluses of cocaine in our country, and the drug dealers figured out a way to market it very cheaply through a new form of cocaine called crack. And throughout the 80s and 90s, we had the crack crisis in our country because of the availability. And then in 2000, we had the oxycodone crisis because suddenly opiate pills were available, partly because of the agency capture at FDA that Marty is now dismantling. And with that, FDA's action abetted that crisis. And so when we have that availability, it turns into a national crisis. And we're still losing 80,000 kids a year. 3 years ago, we lost 106,000 kids to addiction. That's double the number of children that died, of American kids who died during the 20-year Vietnam War. It's 2 Vietnam Wars worth of casualties a year from this crisis. And as Markwayne said, all of us are touched. President Trump is touched. His family also suffered from addiction. My family, I lost a brother to this disease. I lost a niece during COVID, a niece who I raised in my house, who was like a daughter to me. I lost another niece to injuries, who's now a quadriplegic because of this disease. But all of our families are touched, every American family. The financial cost to our country is in the trillions. And what we're determined to do is to avert a 4th wave of addiction. You know, I became an addict because it was so available, but I still had to go to Harlem, or I had to go to the South Bronx, or I had to go to the Lower East Side. And now you can go to any gas station. And the people who are marketing these drugs, we were met with Pam Bondi yesterday, talking about this issue, and with these people from the DEA, and they showed us maps of the places where the vape shops and the smoke shops where this stuff is being sold, and they're around military reservations in our country, and there's, the DEA has done measurements of urine in our troops, and they're skyrocket. The more it's directly correlated to the number of vape shops in their area. They're putting them around schools, they're putting them in our poorest neighborhoods, and now they're putting them in every gas station. And they're marketed for children. They're gummy bears, they're bright colors, they're candy flavored. This is really a sinister industry. As Marty pointed out, our agencies have been asleep at the wheel for all of these other crises. And now we're going to wake up, and we're going to stop this before it starts. So I want to thank all of these ladies and gentlemen for their commitment to making sure that this does not happen again in our country and averting the 4th wave of addiction. Thank you very much.